The world's gone crazy, nothing makes sense. Chips costing bucks a bag, you can't pay your rent. The border's wide open, white people are bad. Trainers trying to teach your kids and everybody's mad with their time. All right, we are back in the third and final Twisted Times episode on climate change. I'm trying to keep it light. I'm joking. The first episode of the climate change, we talked about electric cars. We got Dan Gregory, a lifelong car zealot, to admit that he's modified his behavior to at least be now wishing for a hybrid vehicle. Dan's come so far off it, he's going to go hybrid. And in the second one, we talked about the food supplies. And boy, I got a lot of feedback on both of those episodes. We had a lot of the views on episode 17, the first video podcast, were our highest yet, and a lot of feedback from it. But what about you two? What have you heard about the first two episodes before we close this out tonight?
Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, so I shared it with a couple of personal friends that I knew would have an opinion on it. And the biggest reaction I got was agreement, honestly. We all swung together full bore into EV, and we're all sort of trying to maybe do a two-step backwards and looking at it differently, hybrid EV. That seems to be the general consensus. I have a couple diehards who are just like all in hardcore EV, but in general, I think we all kind of took a pause, backed off, and maybe that's just the way it's been, like with a lot of new stuff that's been on the scene. Like, hey, we're all in, okay, back up and let's figure out how this works, and now slowly go back into it again. But the pendulum swung back a bit.
Yeah.
Good friend of mine was very excited about Tesla. Big Musk fan, and still an Elon Musk fan, and as am I. But they bought a Tesla, and younger couple bought a Tesla. Loved it, bought another Tesla. They can't sell their first Tesla to save their lives. They were expecting to be able to turn it fast, and they just, their comments were that it's a much more muted. Still excited about the technology. Really ticked off that it's not manifesting the way they thought it was going to, and it's not holding its value. It's frustrating for long trips, and not what it was cracked up to be.
Really good friends of mine, a very successful tech entrepreneur, CFO, live in the neighborhood, and a big Tesla guy, big Elon Musk guy. And after a couple years and several Tesla vehicles, they're driving a new Kia Sorento right now. They have
Wow.
decided to go the other direction completely. So I think with talking about electric cars and talking about the food supply and the demands being made across the world in the name of climate change on the food supplies, and we named the last episode Grasshoppers or Steak, and several people asked me, said, hey, I looked at it and went, what the hell are they talking about? And then even my kids, Sophia, looked at it and said, Dad, what is that? I said, well, the people that run the world want you to eat a burger made out of insects. And she's like, are you kidding me? So we talked about it. So I think you set the stage for what I want to talk about tonight, which is if the story around electric cars and the food supply isn't necessarily true. It's a giant, there's truth in climate change. There's truth in needing electric cars. There's truth in having a more humane food supply. All of those are true. But what's happened is that the truth gets buried by the power grab and the money grab, and these enormous big dystopian lies come out of the truth that's buried in there. Would you guys agree with that?
Well, the problem with this, like with everything else, Steve, is that people are recognizing. I mean, this isn't the problem. I'm glad people are recognizing this, but the problem is that we're being manipulated by the factual pieces of that are being manipulated by people that stand to benefit from this. So we're in a situation where our population rate's declining for the first time in a long time. Our population rate's declining. We don't have the problems that the things that are most sensationalized are being sensationalized for profit, not because I don't know that any really thinking person, if they do the research and don't just listen to media babble, we're being manipulated for profit, not for sake of the environment anyway. The people that are most rabid about this are manipulating.
So well, Dave, you couldn't be more right. I mean, honestly, I think when you study conspiracy theories, remember, that is a term that was brought about by the CIA themselves. They invented, look it up, the word conspiracy theory comes from the CIA.
brilliant propaganda campaign on their end to discredit anyone that questions official narratives. And you learn about these huge lies, these gigantic lies, from the Kennedy assassination all the way up to COVID, and using Hitler's mantra, the bigger the lie, the more they'll believe it. If you really want to get them to believe it, tell the lie as big as you can possibly tell it, and they'll follow further because they can't believe you would work to tell a lie that big. The problem with climate change, much like COVID and the others, is that with all the good that's underneath climate change and people willing to be more responsible with the earth, which I think grabs all of our hearts, it's been hijacked. And it's been hijacked for a very, 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 very long time. They've been going back to climate crises since Jimmy Carter. I'm old enough to remember my dad having to wait in line for gas during the climate crisis of the 70s when we couldn't get gasoline anymore. We may never get it again, kind of sort of. So I think people can't believe how big the lie can be and how evil the people behind the lie can be. I think they don't get it. So what I wanted to do tonight was talk about that a little bit. If you study conspiracy theories, if you study alternate looks at official government stories, and if at this point you don't believe that the government can tell a whopper of a story, you really should turn us off. You should turn the Twisted Times off, because you're not going to believe anything we're going to say going forward for the next several years as we talk about the monstrous lies they tell and why they tell them. In the case of climate change, I think it's just like all the other ones. First and foremost, it's a money grab. All right. It's a giant money grab. It's always at least a money grab. And people say, why? How much richer do they have to be? The question's not always how much richer they have to be. And maybe the individuals involved aren't about material accumulation and growth. Quite often they use the money to go buy power. I mean, the money buys power. So what you're seeing right now with a lot of the climate change funding being awarded by all groups, the fucking EPA gets their hands on the money. And you're seeing this money get awarded to various environmental groups. And, we're on video with this one, so I'll do the asterisks. These groups, many of them, are turning around and using it to fund all the stuff that we don't want funded, from Black Lives Matter, Antifa, Palestinian terrorist groups, the importation of illegals in the United States with weapons and funding and the whole thing. But rather than postulate and say, hey, these are bad people in it for lots of money and bad people in it to accumulate power they're never going to give back. RFK's on the trail right now making some good points about some things. And one of the things he'll tell you is that try to figure out the last time government gave back power that you gave them new, right? They don't do it. So, but again, instead of listening to Steve Baroni and Dave Glenn and Dan Gregory on the Twisted Times, let's take this episode and listen to some people that have incredible credibility. And let's start with Dr. Patrick Moore, founder of Greenpeace, and let's hear his opinion on climate change.
One of my missions is to turn on its head the idea that carbon dioxide is a pollutant and somehow dangerous, when in fact it is the most important nutrient for all life on Earth, and without it this would be a dead planet. So I say not only is carbon dioxide good, it is essential, and it's a good thing that we are putting some more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere because it was running low before we came along. If we had definitive proof that CO2 was causing serious problems and we could prove it, don't you think they would write that down on a piece of paper somewhere so people could read it? They don't have definitive proof, period, in science. I'm a student of the philosophy and history of science, and I know that the scientific method has not been applied in such a way as to prove that carbon dioxide is causing the Earth to warm.
Do you think in a few years, say 50 years from now, people go, that was a really stupid period in our history when we tried to change all our energy policies to cut this gas?
I am firmly of the belief that the future will show that this whole hysteria over climate change was a complete fabrication.
Okay, so there you hear from the co-founder of Greenpeace. Now, that's got to bug some of the people on the left who've been dry humping Greenpeace for 50 years. This is the guy that co-founded Greenpeace who's telling you climate change is a fraud, flat out fraud. Is he wrong? Is he crazy? How does that fit into the story?
I heard one sentence. I wrote it down because it stuck out to me. And it everything sounded good except for this one thing. He said it this way: running low before we came along. It didn't ring true with the rest of his statement. I'm not trying to pick it apart, and I'm not saying I disagree with it, because carbon dioxide is vital to life. Of course, we know that. Too much of it is also a very bad thing. It's a greenhouse gas. It traps heat in the planet, and we've seen evidence of that. And that's my belief. I don't want to push it on you guys. That's my opinions. But he said running low before we came along. I'd like to know where that came from, what he means by before, because we've been around for a long time. When did the before we came along line start in his research?
Who's been around for a long time?
I don't know. He said it. He said that running low before we came along.
You just said we've been around for a long time. We
as a human race have been around for a long time producing.
We've been around 6,000 years.
Yeah.
Right. We've been around 6,000 years, and the Earth is billions of years old. And so what he's saying. So I think what he's getting at is that the Earth could have used a big old dose of additives to what the current environmental situation is. Mm-hmm. Either way, if you want me to find something, I'll find a feed that shows you that our total emittance back into the environment today is less than 5% of 3% of all the contaminants that go up into the air. But either way, I'm not that guy. Listen, I'm not a scientist. I'm a football lover, conspiracy book reader, and I'm none of those things. But what you heard from right there was the co-founder of Greenpeace basically saying it's fraud. Now, forget that one for a second. I'm going to bring a date up here. The Epoch Times, because we can't get the New York Times to run the articles and such. And of course, that computer over here is not going to show it. I'm going to bring it up on this one right here. 1,600 scientists, are you guys familiar with this study? 1,600 scientists and professionals signed a no climate emergency declaration, and they're led by 2 Nobel Prize winners who say that there is no climate change emergency. International scientists have jointly signed a declaration dismissing the existence of climate crisis and insisting that carbon dioxide is beneficial to the Earth. There is no climate emergency, the Global Climate Intelligence Group said in its World Climate Declaration. Climate science should be less political, while climate policy should be more scientific. Scientists should openly address uncertainties and exaggerations in their predictions of global warming, while politicians should dispassionately count the real costs as well as the imagined benefits of their policy measures. So, Dave, you and I have talked about climate change for a long time. Yep. Here you go. You've got the co-founder of Greenpeace. You got 1,600 scientists and 2 Nobel Prize winners calling it all bullshit. And we led the show off saying, hey, there's so much good under climate change. I don't want my daughter in Chicago to stop recycling. I don't want people to think we don't have to clean up the national parks and find a more creative way to alternative energies. But what say you?
I got to dig into Patrick Moore a little more. I think from what I can see on what I've read here and what you've said, this is a guy that loves the environment. Truly is passionate about making sure that we use our natural resources responsibly. And I think that's great. And I think it's interesting. I found a description of them where it says, a true environmentalist, Moore is a rare example of someone who places principles above all else. And I think, again, I'll go back to the statement that I made before, and that's that it appears to me, and climate change is kind of interesting for me because I definitely, you said this in the last episode, I love our national parks. I love them as much as anybody else does, maybe more than most. I love reading John Muir quotes, and I'd like to be out in the outdoors. I think in the end, people need to study it for themselves and figure out what is truly happening to our environment right now. And it appears to me that that climate change, or our Earth's been changing at least for the time humans have been on it. It's been going through cycles for the last 6,000 years, and that we know that from the fossil record, and from everything that we know about the environment. So, if you look at the past 150 years, it doesn't appear to me that humans have had that much of an impact on it anyway. So, anyway, I think it's all business.
That's where the consensus starts to go when you get a little bit away from the government side of this thing. So listen to, again, I'm going to go back to some people that I've listened to in the past. And you listen to Dan Pena, right? Dan Pena is a Wall Street Journal financial analyst. He's really gruff. I mean, I kind of like him for that. Let's listen to what Dan Pena has to say about climate change.
What are you guys going to do when our ocean level rises?
If that were really true, which you believe, if the water on the planet is going to rise up 10 feet, that means the southern part of the United States is gone. England is gone. The banks of this world know it's not going to happen. If it were really true, the banks wouldn't invest. The banks wouldn't finance. You know those 30, 40-year mortgages? The world will be over by then. Is Barclays Bank going to give you a motherfucking loan? Greatest respect, ma'am. It's the greatest fraud that's been perpetrated on mankind this century.
So Dan Pena is
so
an
shy.
animal, right? He's an animal. And but in that clip with Dan Pena is the fact that he says, "Hey, the banks are in on everything. The banks always know.
Yeah,
the banks know. The banks know, and yet they continue to invest in the coastal cities. Does that have weight?"
Yeah, of course it does.
Absolutely. Follow the money, like we were saying earlier. Yeah,
I think
great barometer.
I think one of the really compelling things, to what Dan Pena is saying. I sent you guys over a link from Twitter in the chat here. It's got a for those who've missed it. Let's recap. In 1966, we said oil was going to be gone. We were going to use all the oil in 10 years. In 1967, there was going to be a famine by 1975. 68 said overpopulation is going to spread worldwide. 1969, everyone's going to disappear in a cloud of blue steam by 1989. 1970, America subject to water rationing by 74 and food rationing by 1980. 1971, new ice age is coming by 2020 or 2030. 1972, new ice age by 2070. 1974, another ice age. 1978, no end in sight, 30-year cooling trend. So 1978, it's a 30-year cooling trend from the climate change people.
Yeah, my whole life has been we're going to be on fire underwater or something. There's been no point where we weren't running from what the next bad thing was going to be. And every time you think about it, it's the government using it to raise more money and consolidate more power.
Yeah.
I mean, Tucker did a good piece on that recently, talking about how they become more, the whole climate change story makes the government more powerful. And my God, the consolidation of power into Brussels, when you think about what's happened over the course of the last year, with them being able to tell farms they can't produce anymore, and watching the rebellion in France and in the Netherlands and throughout the Deutschlands and such. Imagine telling the farms you can't produce anymore. You're not allowed to make it anymore.
Insanity. You're right.
And only really in France, where, listen, you guys really have to study this. It's interesting read. But like American farmers, the French farmers have been subsidized forever. Okay, they've been subsidized forever, but they have so much power through the subsidization that it takes a lot to make French leadership afraid of something. And the French, because they're always protesting. I've been going to Charles de Gaulle forever, and I assume
there's always a protest. Yeah,
they're always on strike. You can't get from gate 10 to gate 20 because they're on strike in between gates 15 and 16. The French aren't afraid of much in that. But man, when the farmers got pissed and they were blocking off major roads with tractors and farms and such, they got pissed off. I think there's on the money grab side, there's a couple of things. Dan, in the last episode, we were talking about electric cars for 2 episodes ago, and Dave and I were waiting for you to say, hey, I know it doesn't really save the environment because there's a lot of work that goes into making an electric car. And then Dave went into detail saying, hey, listen, Dan saved his ass by saying that because we know there's a giant debacle going on. There's this woman. Oh, yeah. There's this woman named Rachel Matthews, not to be confused with
The gentleman that you don't like.
Jonathan Mehta on MSNBC, the little guy on MSNBC.
That little boy.
Right. Every episode I'm gonna try to get that in. That's how much I hate that guy.
I knew that was coming.
But
It's
Rachel Matthews she runs What the World Needs. Okay, she's exactly what the world needs. She's somewhere in the UK, and she runs this city council auditing kind of group, and they go in there and they just take every policy they want to put in place. And she doesn't just do like the local, protest by parents. She dissects it like a professional journalist. Let me play for you. Listen to what Rachel Matthews has to say. Rachel Matthews has to say about the solar panel industry.
I've been a supporter of green energy and a keen environmentalist since my 20s. My office is solar powered, so I was mortified to discover that a single lithium mine causes millions of tons of waste every year laced with sulfuric acid and radioactive uranium, polluting the water supply for 300 years, not to mention the unacceptable human costs with child labour to mine cobalt. When I researched which solar panel to purchase, I did not for 1 minute consider it would be made by people trapped in razor wire enclosed labour camps, being exposed to large quantities of quartz dust which causes silicosis. Please note that the Ethical Consumer Organisation report that it is hard to avoid forced labour in the solar panel supply chain. Wind turbines, which last about 20 years, consume a colossal amount of resources and energy to manufacture and install, not to mention the blight and bird kill. They require diesel engines to start them up and then gallons of oil to lubricate, and they can't readily be recycled. Solar panels are also extremely difficult to recycle, costing more than the production of the panel. And lithium batteries pose steep challenges too. Add to that the human suffering, which we've all unwittingly been part of just by owning a laptop or mobile phone, which is minimal compared to what's required for an EV or solar farm. These so-called green or ethical solutions aren't solutions at all. Just very good marketing from the $1.5 trillion a year climate change industry. That's $4 billion a day, by the way. None of us can undo what's already been done, but what we can all do is make sure this doesn't escalate exponentially with fleets of unnecessary EVs and acres of solar farms eating up our precious farmland.
So that's pretty damning. I mean, what say you about the good Rachel?
So I think, a couple of things that just stood out to me on that one. I'm actually really interested in solar power just because I'm into the idea of off grid, not being dependent on the grid for stuff.
Yeah.
And that makes
solar
me
panel on our smaller RV, and we go off grid and live off it.
That actually makes me second guess some of the investments that I've been planning to make in solar. Just as first of all, the wind farms and the wind farm piece of it too, like it's an eyesore. All the farmland that's been taken over by the wind farms, it's bad for birds. I mean, if you think about from an ecology perspective, we just haven't thought it through. It's messed up. It's messed up a bunch of bird migration patterns. I'm all about alternative energy, not because I hate fossil fuels, but because I'm interested in alternative energy. I just from a technology perspective. So yeah, I thoroughly agree with what she's saying, and it actually, I hadn't thought about the impact of cobalt mining and stuff like that, like how much more you need that for, if you think about laptops and cell phones already, compound that by the technology required by solar farms. Yeah, wow, crazy. I'm kind of mad at you for playing that for me, actually.
Right?
Yeah, I'm mad for a different reason. I started expanding that out to everything I own. This thing right here, this has got stuff in it that came from mine. There's a lithium battery inside this thing. So I started thinking about that outside of, it's not unique to solar that there is human strife in mining on the planet to get the precious metals to make whatever it is we want to make our lives more convenient. Solar is a big part of it because it's new. But it's been around for a long time. How do we make stuff that doesn't harm the planet and harm other people? I kind of think I was expanding on that. I know the concept of what we're talking about, but yeah, I looked at solar for a hot minute back when Tesla came out with the solar powered roof tiles, and it was so outrageously expensive to get it at the time when it first came out. And I'm not quite sure that the juice is worth the squeeze to this day, making it neutral, like trying to like when do you get the bag back?
You're not going to get it there. You're not going to get
not
it.
My lifetime.
And I want to close this out with some rebuttals and some more video. We're over our time right now. Let's do what we normally don't do. Let's do a hard stop on this and pick right back up with episode 20. It's actually funny. This will be 19, and we'll come after episode 20.
And then you have 21 already.
Closing out the time. Yeah, the 21's already in the time. Let's do that one. All right. Let's end this right now and come back and keep everybody on track.
Sounds good. I'm gonna take a 2-minute bio break.